Hi, I'm Peggy Farren, and we are live with the Understand Photography Show, where we talk about travel and nature photography. Welcome to episode 25. So are you ready to finally learn how to shoot in the manual setting, or how to use your flash, or how about how to really understand the composition rules so that you can start winning in photo competitions or start selling your photography as art? Well, it's time to take the 4 weeks to proficiency in photography. Our next live class starts on March 21st. I teach it live. We use GoToMeeting to do it so that you can ask questions and I can show you pictures and I can even look at your camera if I need to help you with your settings. It's a hands-on class even though it's through the internet. Does that make sense? It's a great class. It starts March 21st. Now, if you want to see my teaching style, we have a free webinar called How to Get a Solid Photography Education in Just 4 Weeks. And that link will be in our show notes on the understandphotography.com webpage. So watch the free webinar. If you like my teaching style, you think this is going to be a good class for you, I'll see you on March 21st. A couple other things I want to talk about. We still have openings for our St. Augustine photography workshop. It is a little bit about the buildings and the fort and sunrise and a lot about birds. It's a great, great workshop led by Joe Fitzpatrick. He's been leading that. I think this might be his 7th year doing it here at Understand Photography. It's a really good workshop. Don't miss it. It's May 4th through the 7th. And lastly, we are all geared up and getting ready for the Florida Camera Club Council Conference. That was a mouthful. f3c.org is their website. It's a world-class convention right here in Southwest Florida this coming weekend, March 10th through the 12th, and love it to see you there. I'm actually teaching a separate workshop for the pre-convention class or something like that called Using Flash for Portrait Photography. So if you want to learn more about your flash on and off camera, take my class on Friday morning, March 10th, and then on the 11th and 12th is the formal conference. Rick Salmon is the keynote speaker. There's 14 or 16, I forget, big name speakers, including me. So come on down, f3c.org. You'll get all the information. Okay, so our topic today is wildflower photography, and our guest is Roger Hammer. Roger is an award-winning professional naturalist, author, botanist, tough word for me, and photographer. Roger is the author of several books, including a really good Everglades guide. He's a sought-after speaker. He speaks at environmental groups, botanical gardens, civic organizations. He's a good dynamic speaker, and he's here with us today. Welcome, Roger.
Yay.
Thank you. Yay. Now, naturalist, professional naturalist, what's the difference between that and a master naturalist?
Well, master naturalist is a course you can go through to learn basically about nature in general. I worked as a professional naturalist. I was a director of Castillo Hammock Nature Center for Miami-Dade Parks Department. It's a 120-acre nature center, a preserve, and we led canoe trips and kayak fishing trips and wildflower walks and bike hikes and all the fun stuff.
Wow, and you were the professional naturalist.
I was the senior naturalist for Miami-Dade Parks Department.
Wow. What's the name of the place you worked?
Castillo Hammock. It's one of the...
Castillo Hammock.
Hammock. It's a 120-acre preserve with a nature center in Miami-Dade County.
I've never been there. I don't even know about it.
Yeah, we kind of kept a low profile.
I do now. Geez, and Miami's only 2 hours away.
Yes.
It's close. So you were there for how long?
33 years.
Oh my gosh. Now, how'd you get that gig? How'd you get into that?
Lucked into it. I was working at a research shrimp farm out at Turkey Point Power Plant. The University of Miami had a research shrimp farm where we raised shrimp from eggs to adults in closed systems to see how economically feasible it was to farm shrimp. And the sea grant that I was working under was going away, and there happened to be a park attendant position opening up at this park, and I took that position. And just within months, the director of the park left, and I applied for the job and
wow.
kept on going with it.
Oh my God.
So
now, are you from Miami?
I'm born and raised in Cocoa Beach. But
Really, a real Floridian.
yeah,
Wow.
and and back in those days, growing up in, the part I can remember was in the 1950s, and I had the idyllic childhood of the beachfront home in Cocoa Beach in the 50s, and you could walk down to the beach in those days for miles, and there'd be no other footprints on the beach sand but yours.
Wow.
Just be sea oats and salt palmettos as far as you could see.
Oh my God.
And those days
And you
are
lived
gone.
right on the beach?
Yeah.
Wow. If you lived on the beach here, that would mean you were very, very wealthy.
Yeah, you didn't have to be. Well, I don't know. We look back at it now, and that was a lot of money back then too.
Yeah,
So,
to live on a beach anywhere, I would imagine. So,
Right.
Cocoa Beach, were you there in the 60s? Did you see I Dream a Genie?
Oh yeah. But that all ended. I was growing up I was one of the first surfers in Florida, and was getting real good, and joined a competition team. And that all ended when my mom walked down to the beach one day waving a letter in her hand, and I paddled in to see what she was doing down the beach with a letter, and it was my draft notice.
Oh.
So,
So you went to war.
well, I ended up joining the Army to keep from being drafted, and I was a tank gunner for an education specialist for 3 years, and then got out. I was in mostly in Germany, Okinawa, and Vietnam.
Wow. Now, how did you end up in Miami? Did you just apply for that job?
No. When I got out of the Army, I had an uncle that worked for the University of Miami, the Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences, just in shipping and receiving. And he heard about the job opening up at the shrimp farm, and he called me and asked me if I wanted to, work at a shrimp farm. And I said, sure, why not?
Why not? Shrimp farm. I
So-
never even knew there was such a thing.
I know. Yeah, no, they farm shrimp now.
Wow.
A lot of the shrimp you buy in the grocery store are farmed.
Really? I love shrimp. That's good to know. All right, so while you were working at, why can't I remember the name of the place you worked
Castello
at?
Hammock.
Castello.
Castello.
How do you spell that?
Castелlow.
Oh, that's
He
hard.
was a citrus farmer, one of the first citrus farmers in Florida, and the land that he owned, the 40 acres at the time, was around that hammock, so it got named after him.
Did he donate it? Or you don't know?
No, he didn't.
No, he didn't.
They bought it from him.
Okay, well, bummer.
Yeah.
All right, so you're working there.
Right.
You're a naturalist. You're really
Yeah.
into nature, obviously.
Well, yeah. You look back at how things, sort of influence you and push you in different directions. When I started working at that park, there was a group that met there called the Native Plant Workshop. They met there once a month on the third Tuesday, and it was people that brought in plants to get identified. And so I was the director of the park, so I had to be there, and so that was just sort of forced learning for me. But before all that, in 1972, a book came out called The Native Orchids of Florida by Carlisle Lure, who is now a good friend of mine. And in that book were 102 orchids that you could find, growing wild in Florida. And I don't know why, I bought that book and I just became intrigued
With the orchids.
at the orchids and started looking for them. And now I'm up to 96 of them.
You didn't get to all 100-something
Well,
yet?
some of them are gone. You can't get to
Oh.
them, but I've photographed 96 of Florida's native orchids.
Oh my gosh,
And
that's so cool.
Kind of, but in that time, I was only looking for orchids. I didn't care about all these other things I was walking past. I was just out on a mission to see orchids.
Yeah.
And it took a while to change over to starting to look at these
Everything else.
other wildflowers,
Oh, wow.
So it was orchids that caused it
got
all.
Well, it's funny because, I did my first swamp walk a year and a half ago or something with Chris Hopkins, I told you, and he got into the orchids because it gives you a mission. He likes photography, but it gives
Sure.
you something to do while
Right.
you're out there.
Right.
Your mission is to find the orchids.
Right,
or-
it's just like bird watching. It gives them a reason to be outdoors.
Exactly, and it's wonderful. I love it out there.
Mm-hmm.
I love being in the swamp now. The city girl likes the swamp. So now that kind of just led into photography then.
Yes, but back in those days, I was only taking pictures just so I could look at them and say, "Look what I found,"
Okay.
and just show people. I had my own little book, I was making, of, my own photos and just thumbing through them and looking at, at them. And one day, out of the middle of nowhere, Falcon called me from Helena, Montana, and asked if I wanted to write a wildflower guide on the Everglades. The Everglades
And
Wildflowers.
Falcon is a publisher?
That's a publisher.
And how did they find out about you?
They called Fairchild Tropical Garden and wanted to know who to call, and they told them to call me. So, so the phone rang, and Falcon has since then been bought out by Globe Pequot Press, and then Globe Pequot Press got bought out by Rowman and Littlefield. So, but they're still Falcon guides. You know, they're an imprint of this larger company now. But at the time, they were just a small little company. And the neat thing about Falcon guides, and I didn't know anything about them until I worked for them, is they're color coded.
Okay.
You know, you can go to the blue and purple section, and there you're going to find the blue and purple flowers. And they're regional. You know, if you were to take my Everglades Wildflower Guide out into Everglades National Park, you'd probably find 90 or 95% of all the flowers you found out there in that book.
Wow.
But if you were to take the book on Florida wildflowers to into Everglades National Park, you'd probably find maybe 60% of them or something. And then if you go to the southeastern United States book on wildflowers, you're probably going to find 30%. And if you take the wildflowers of the eastern United States, you're lucky to find 10%. So the larger the region a book covers, the less useful it becomes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So these regional wildflower guides, I have one out on Everglades wildflowers, Florida Keys wildflowers, and Central Florida wildflowers. And now I'm working on one on all of Florida, but it's those regional guides that
they're really going to help you.
They're the ones that you need to take in the field with you in that region.
Wow.
Simply because it's just
specific.
covering specific to that region.
Exactly.
So they work very well there.
That is so cool. So that's how you wrote your first book?
Everglades Wildflowers was the first one.
And you weren't even planning to write a book?
I was saying I was going to, but I didn't know how to go about doing it.
I mean, that's amazing to me that somebody just called you, said, here, write a book. That's awesome.
I know. So
now, did they give you like money up front and everything?
Yeah, a little bit. Of course, the money they give you up front has to be paid back through royalties. So you know, it's a catch-22. But the money up front allows you to go out and buy a better camera and
so that's
better
that's how you got into photography, because you had to write this book.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, my pictures are not going to cut it.
Well, and Falcon they're hardcore. I mean, they don't publish just any photo you send them.
Right.
And I've never had a photo rejected or had to retake one or anything like that. But other authors I've talked to have had up to 10% of them sent back. So Falcon makes you a better photographer. You get paranoid, you know, so you make sure that the photos you're sending them are as top-notch as they can be.
Wow. So it's funny because now in my world, you're backwards, because in my world, people get into photography, then they get into the flowers or the birds, and then they learn about them, you know?
Yeah, I never took a photography class or anything, or watched any, videos or anything like that.
You just got a camera and started shooting? How did you know what kind of camera to buy?
I don't know. I just bought. Friends of mine had Nikon, so I bought a Nikon, and I started out with a 12. What was it? It was 12.3 megapixels, and then I worked up to 16, and then 24, and now.
What are you using now?
A Nikon D810.
Okay.
36.
So you got a big one now.
Yeah.
You got a big guy.
But unless you're, unless you're blowing photos up to mural size, once you get over like 12 megapixels, it doesn't really matter for what I do. I mean, I look at the photos I took with my Nikon D300, and it's hard to tell them apart from the D810.
Yeah. If you have a good lens too, that makes a huge difference. I
learned that too.
Learned that the hard way?
A lot of people, I'm a long distance canoer and also a kayak fisherman, and I see people buying these really expensive kayaks or canoes, and then they cheap out on the paddle.
And the paddle's where it's at?
And the paddle's what makes you go.
So that's the same
you
thing
need
in
this
photography.
My paddle in my kayak was $450, and so
oh my gosh.
You need a good paddle. So it's the same way with cameras. You'd be better served by putting your money into the lens than the camera body, in my experience anyway.
I agree totally. Totally agree with that.
It's a little bit backwards. You know, people buy these really high-end camera bodies, and then they'll go out and cheap out on the lenses and wonder why their photos aren't coming out.
They don't understand.
I know.
And you know, the other thing is the lenses have they're a better value because they last longer. And when I first started my company in 2001, one of the lenses I bought was the 70-200 f2.8, you know, top of the line Canon. And as I got older, it got heavier.
How'd that happen?
I know. So I quit using it. I bought a different lens, and I sat there in the closet, and I loved that lens. I didn't want to let it go, but we had a guy here at the studio from Used Photo Pro, and I finally thought, I just got to sell it. I think he bought it. I think I paid like $2,100 or $2,500 for it in 2001, and he bought it for $800. I was surprised. I mean, that held its value pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm sure if I tried to sell it on eBay or something, I probably could have gotten more money for it. But you know, I wasn't getting around to that. So, so that's another reason for the good lenses, right? Okay, so you started saying, okay, I have to learn a little bit. You got a decent camera, but you were just shooting in a automatic setting, I'm assuming, if you're not taking any classes or anything.
In the beginning, but I learned that I like to set the I think it's called aperture preferred. So I'm setting the f-stop, and it's telling me what speed it's going to be shooting at that f-stop. Almost all of my photos, I feel like I'm cheating if I shoot at f/18. Almost all of them are between f/22 and f/46, and most all of them are f/32. I kind of keep it on f/32 and see if I can get away with it or not. And then I'll move down, or if it's, you know, in the other end of the scale, I might, you know, go up to even
Now
as
you're
high.
doing f/22 or 32 because you want
Depth of
as
field.
much of the flower to be sharp as possible.
Yes, because my reason for photography is to publish them in field guides, and people need to see
Every
the
detail.
flower.
Right.
And so
Now, what kind of lens are you normally using?
I have one lens. It's a 105 millimeter Nikkor 2.8
The macro lens?
macro lens.
Canon has a similar lens, and I really want it, but I don't have it.
Well, I mean, I don't, in field guides, you don't want to take a little tiny flower and blow it up huge with a full-on macro lens, because it, you know, somebody's trying to identify this thing and they're looking at a little tiny flower,
Right.
and they see this picture of this great big thing, it's not going to register. So you don't want to, you want to keep it in context.
Okay.
So, so I don't do what I would say is macro photography, but I use that macro lens mainly because you don't have to get as close to the subject as you might, or as you would have to if you had like a 50 or 60 millimeter macro.
Right.
You know, you can be back away from it a little bit. And,
So you're on a full frame camera with a 105 millimeter macro lens. Almost always.
And
That's
almost always at f/32 or f/22. Pretty much all the time.
So you're obviously on a tripod, because I would imagine your shutter speed goes slow at times.
I always use a tripod. I always use a wired shutter release.
I always forget that too,
Yeah,
like the clicker thing.
The ones that aren't wired, when you press the button, it doesn't take the picture right away. There's a pause, and if you're waiting on the wind to stop and you go, oh, it stopped, you need that shutter to, you know, you need
it to work.
You need to work right
then.
Second, you know, right that very second. And the non-wired shutter releases aren't.
The other problem I have with those is because, you know, we lead photo trips. And so everybody, we say, and we tell them to get the kind that plugs, you know, get the shutter release cable that plugs into your camera.
Sure.
They're like $8. I mean, they're cheap too. No, they want the wire. And, you know, there are reasons to use the wireless. But it seems like they never work I always have the photo, the photo trip, and the first day we're just trying to mess with those doggone shutter releases.
I could see losing it pretty easy too.
Yeah, because there's no wire to connect it.
Yeah, the only thing I'll have to say about wired shutter releases, if you're a person like me and you take a lot of pictures out in swamps, is to take the cord and wrap it up and make it real short. Otherwise, it's going to dangle down in the water. Ask me how I know.
I love that. That's funny. Ask me how I know.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many
me
times I'm like, where's my shutter release? And I go, oh, it's underneath the water. You see the wire going down and it disappears in the water. You go, okay.
I'd be going, snake. No, just kidding. All right, so this all started from your first book.
Yes.
Okay, so you start taking pictures, start taking better pictures of flowers.
Yeah.
You publish your first book. But now we have a stack of books.
Well, after Everglades Wildflowers came out, they asked me if I had any other ideas for wildflower guides, and the first thing out of my mouth was Bahama Wildflowers. And they freaked out because it was international. And I said, you don't need to sell one book in the Bahamas. You sell all the books in Florida and, cruise lines, airport bookshops, and, just traveling, but they didn't buy into that. So I talked them into Florida Keys Wildflowers.
Okay.
Now, the Florida Keys, when people think about the word wildflower, they most always think about little herbaceous wildflowers. They don't think of trees and shrubs and all that.
Right, I don't either.
Yeah, but when I got down to the Florida Keys and I started naming all the little herbaceous flowers, there was like, 50 or 60 or 70 of them. I don't know how many there were, and I needed 300.
Oh my.
So I had to add, so then I started looking at the cactus and then the vines and the shrubs, and then I finally had to start looking at trees. So the good thing about that book is it does cover pretty much all the trees, all the shrubs, all the vines, all the cactus, all the little herbaceous wildflowers. So it works really, really well in the Keys. The bummer is that book doesn't sell nearly as much as like Everglades Wildflowers, because that's
because the Keys are not
how
known
do I
for...
put it? Yeah, it's not a real literary society.
You go to the Keys to drink, not to look at flowers.
Yeah, I even called in the book. I even called it a drinking community with a fishing problem.
That sounds about right. I'll tell you.
And there's not, there's some parks down there, John Pennycamp and Long Key and Bahia Honda, and of course the Key Deer Wildlife Refuge. But that's not the destination for most people. So.
But this was the same company. Who published the second book.
Yes, and then right on the heels of that came. Then I did the book you have, the Exploring Everglades National Park and the surrounding area.
Good book.
And I did that book because I've been there, done that. I've paddled the 99-mile Everglades Wilderness Waterway 3 times solo.
Wow.
In 2010 when I retired.
Solo? All by yourself?
That's what solo means.
I know, but but I mean, isn't it dangerous?
No, I would say it's more dangerous to drive across Tamiami Trail to get to to Everglades National Park up in the northern.
I'm never doing that at night again. I drove Tamiami Trail from Miami back to Naples at night one time.
Yeah.
That was a terrifying ride.
And you know what? It's 99 miles, but the campsites are about 10 miles apart, so you got all day to go 10 miles. It's not like it's exercise or anything, So I did that 3 times solo, and then after I retired, I bought a really nice canoe from Toronto, a 16-foot Kevlar canoe that weighs like 30 pounds. You can pick it up with one hand. And so I took it from Flamingo, around Cape Sable, and all the way up the Gulf Coast, about halfway to Chokoloskee, to Highland Beach.
Oh my gosh.
And then back into the rivers, and then came back through the interior, and that was 120 miles in 10 days. So that was my way of relaxing after retiring.
After retiring, doesn't sound very, well, I guess it was being out there.
Just being out there and watching the
I love being
sunsets.
Out there.
I mean, the sunsets on Cape Sable are killer.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I was the only, there's 11 miles of beach and I was the only one there. So.
What about the mosquitoes?
Yes. I kind of joked about some of the photos I've taken in my book, because a lot of these plants, including orchids, flower in the summertime in the mangrove buttonwood country, and in talks that I've given, I've told people that I've had to throw a rock through the mosquitoes and take the picture through the hole.
Oh my gosh.
It's pretty intense.
I remember one time when I first moved to this area, like I've been here 25 years, and my sister-in-law, it was the first time I ever met her. She's from the Dominican Republic. So my brother, you know, says, oh, you know, here's my new girlfriend or whatever. And I said, oh, you want to go? We're going to go to Smallwood's store, because I'd never been there. And of course it was the summer, right? Yeah. So we drove down and we saw the Fakahatchee Strand boardwalk. Oh, well, let's go here. So we pull over, we get out of the car, we're putting all the bug spray on. Those mosquitoes were going after our eyes. Man, we didn't even make it to the beginning. We didn't even make it out of the parking lot. We got back in the car and we're like, oh my, but it wasn't as bad down at Smallwood.
Yeah, it depends on where you are, you know, and how exposed you are, and if you're in the woods.
It's unbelievable. They were going for our eyes.
Yeah, running and screaming are optional.
We were doing that too. Oh my gosh. All right, so when you were doing these guides, obviously, did you know about all these flowers? How did you know where they were? Now, okay, if I want to know where they are, I'm going to buy your book.
Sure.
How did you know?
Just from, I mean, I led wildflower walks out in the Everglades for many years, and I hunted for orchids out there for many years.
So you just kept learning more and more.
So I kind of knew where they were, but when I stepped into unknown territory, Central Florida, now I'm in a different kind of a situation where I don't know. I not only don't know where these plants, these wildflowers are, I don't even know what wildflowers I'm supposed to be looking for.
Right, yeah, yeah.
So I met a friend up there, a guy named Chris Delaney, who lives in Avon Park. He's even had a couple plants named for him, and he's even discovered new species and all that, you know. So I befriended him, and he and I have become really good friends. So he helped me out tremendously in Central Florida. Now that I'm working on Florida wildflowers, I'm spending a lot of time in the Panhandle. I just came back last Sunday from the Panhandle.
Oh my God.
And I've got several friends up there that know plants like nobody's business. So I just hop in, I just drag them into my truck, and they just tell me, turn here, go there. Okay, we'll get out here, and you walk over, there's that. And I go, okay, and take its picture.
Well, I'm going to pick your brain about that, because we want to start doing tours to Apalachicola, because I saw that for the first time this summer, and I was like, oh my God, I love this place.
Yeah, I've got some people up there that know that area.
After the show, I got to pick your brain a little bit. Okay, so now, are these all published by the same? Did it just like one book after another, or? Pretty much.
After the Exploring Everglades National Park book, I did Central Florida Wildflowers. During that time, this little book here called Florida Icons. This was, it's called 50 Classic Views of the Sunshine State. So I had to pick 50 things that were iconic to Florida, and you get a full page. It's kind of like a little mini coffee table book. You have a full page photo on one side, and then
description.
Like 300 words text on the other page, and so you got to pick anything you wanted. So I wanted to have kind of a little bit of everything. So there's stuff in there like the St. Augustine Castle. There's you know, what's funny is I Googled Florida icons. I just typed in Florida icons. The very first thing that popped up was pink plastic lawn flamingos. So
are they in your book?
They're in the book. But I picked people like Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, you know, the author of The Yearling and all that, you know, in Cross Creek, and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who I knew very well. And
she's in Everglades.
She's the grandmother of the Everglades. I mean, she wrote the classic book Everglades River of Grass. Okay. And I've known her or knew her for quite some time. She lived to be 108.
Wow.
And just a tough woman. And I even was honored by receiving the first Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Award, and it was her that gave it to me in Fairchild Tropical Garden. And after that, she invited me to her little house in Coconut Grove, so I went there with her. And she walked in. I was 38, and she was 92 at the time.
Wow.
And she walked into the kitchen and she said, do you want something to drink? And I said, well, I'll just have whatever you're having. And I figured it was going to be Lipton tea or some lemonade or something, She walks out with a bottle of whiskey and 2 shot glasses and starts pouring them in there, and we start chugging them down. And I'm thinking, holy cow, And I told friends of mine, I said, after about 6 of them, she was looking pretty hot.
93?
Well, drink till they're cute. But anyway, I mean, there's, what else is in that book? American bison are in that book.
Are they in Gainesville, right?
They're up in Paynes Prairie. People don't realize there's actually wild bison in Florida.
That's another photo tour I want to start doing.
Yeah, that's another good one.
Because they've got wild horses there, too.
They've got the old cracker horses and cracker cattle. That's where that word Florida cracker came from, was when they took the whips and went out there to round up the wild cattle and cows and stuff out in the woods.
I'm going to do a short commercial for a friend of mine. They have a company called Dreamlander Tours out of Goodland. And she's Chinese and he's originally from Florida. So the name of their company is Rice and Cracker. Isn't that cute?
That's great.
And they do great boat tours.
Yeah, there's a book by a friend, not a friend, but a guy I used to like to read his writings in the Miami Herald called Al Burt. And he wrote a book called The Tropic of Cracker. The
Tropic of Cracker.
That's great.
I know. I didn't know until, I've lived in Florida for a long time, but I lived in Orlando in the city kind of thing. But I didn't know that Florida was such a big cattle state. I had no idea.
It was, at one time, it was the 3rd largest cattle state in the United States. I don't know what it is now, but at one time it was either. 3rd.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and so, there's other stuff in there. There's margaritas in there. Key West is in there. The Flagler Railroad, and, just things. Miami.
It's fun.
Yeah.
They have a website.
Skyline.
I forget what it's called. Florida, I don't know, Off the Beaten Path or something like that. And they've got some cool stuff in there that I would like to. I'm going to look at it. I didn't even look at it yet. So.
Well, and after that, I had an idea because we used to teach classes at Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden and also at the park where I worked on hummingbird and butterfly gardening. And so most of the other books on that subject are for more northern, they get down here in South Florida and they start losing it, and they don't include a lot of the plants, the tropical plants that you can grow down here. So I decided to fill that gap, and I wrote this book called Attracting Hummingbirds and Butterflies in Tropical Florida. So it has 200 plants that you can grow in the warmer counties.
Are they easy to grow?
Yeah.
Because I love hummingbirds. I would love to have hummingbirds in my garden.
Yeah, plant it and they will come. They're here every year.
Wow. How long does it take to attract them if you start planting the plants?
If you're in their flight pattern, they'll be there the next season. They're here in South Florida from about late September and October into about April or maybe into May, and then they're gone. So you need to plant plants that flower during that season.
Okay. I have to buy the book.
You have to buy the book.
So now this is all the same publisher, and every time you have an idea, you just say, hey, I have an idea, and they say, yes, let's give you money.
The one I just mentioned was University Press of Florida.
Okay, so how did that come about? Because the reason I'm asking is because we have a lot of viewers and listeners who, they're really into photography. They want to publish books, but nobody. I don't know how to publish a book except for self-publishing stuff through Amazon.
Yeah, and the only problem with self-publishing is now you become the marketer, the warehouse, the shipper, the author. You have to do all that.
Right.
The good side of it is that you're collecting all the money.
Right.
With publishers, they're going to pay you 10%, or if you're lucky, maybe 15% of the wholesale price.
Okay.
So, you have to have a lot of books before you start making money.
Okay.
And
you started writing the books while you were still working, because you said you're retired now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And
so while you're working, it's a nice little little bit of side money.
Yeah, and and you know, I had a job since I was the director of the park. You know, I could give myself a day off, you know, if I needed to go do something, you know.
Yeah.
But so I had a little bit of an advantage there. But yeah, I spent a lot of time in weekends, you know, running here and there. With the Everglades, it wasn't so bad because I live in Homestead. You know, the main entrance to Everglades National Park is only 15, 20 minutes away, so that was easy. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if it was, you know, the Panhandle or something like that.
Yeah, you have to take some serious time off for
Yeah,
that. That's like
8
9 hours away or something.
Right, yeah.
Oh my gosh. So now, tell me about these identification cards.
Yeah, that's another project that's with Quick Reference Publishing. The lady that runs that right now, she lives up in Palm Beach County. But when I first started working for her, she lived in Austin, Texas. And those are just like they say, they're quick reference. They're for people that are travelers that just want something to, you know, this book here has 360 flowers in it. That card that covers the same region has 90.
Okay.
Or 88, somewhere in there. So that's the difference. It depends
and
on
this
how
is easier to carry around.
Easier to carry. It's not going to cover, you know, all the what you're going to see, but it'll hit the you know, the main ones.
Now, where do people? Obviously, I bought your book from Amazon.
Yeah, you can get that on Amazon
What
or
about
Barnes
these?
and Noble. Those.
Where do you sell these? Do you sell these mostly through the big chain?
Mm-hmm.
But do you also sell them in the state parks and things like that?
Yes,
or?
they're in state
And
parks.
how did you get them in there? Or did your publisher?
The publisher does that.
Oh.
And this publisher gets these in all of the state parks. You can hardly go into a state park and not find those.
And you were telling me before the show that you actually make more money on these than you do on the books.
Yeah, mainly because you sell so many more of those than
because
you do.
These are, what'd you say,
books.
$8 or $9?
$8, and these are $25. So a German tourist is going to buy one of those before they buy one of those.
That's just
so
brilliant.
You'll sell way, way, way more of those than you will a book.
And the photography is beautiful.
Yeah, those things come out pretty nice.
So let's talk about the photography. I'm so interested in the book, I forgot we're supposed to be talking about wildflowers.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm interested in your story. It's fascinating to me because I think, I mean, look at how many books do you have?
6.
6 books, and then
on
all
number
these
7.
guides. And what book are you working on now? Did you just
The
tell me?
Complete Guide to Florida Wildflowers.
The whole Florida,
the
that's
whole
right.
state.
That's right.
So it's combining these plus North Florida and the Panhandle.
Now, let me just ask you that. Okay, so how many trips are you going to have to take to the Panhandle and to Central Florida and whatever else?
I just got back from the Panhandle for my 6th trip.
Wow.
And I've got at least 2 more to go before I finish up.
Wow. Now you
And
you have to pay for all this yourself.
Yes.
There's nobody giving you money
well,
for
it's
that
a tax
kind of
write-off, but
still,
yeah,
you still have to pay for it. You
right,
just don't have
still
to pay as many taxes, right? Yeah.
Right, but yeah, and sometimes I sleep in my truck, and sometimes I'm, you know, in little backwoods, $29 a night motels that, you know, where water doesn't come out of the faucet and kind of stuff, you know, that kind of stuff, and it's kind of hard too because, you know, like here, if you had a computer that pulled up restaurants, say, you want to go out to eat and pulled up restaurants, it would show you the first 10, then the next 10, and the next 10, and you get up in some of those little towns up there, and it'll show you 3.
And they're 20 miles away.
It'll be like Subway, KFC, and Burger King, you know, and that's it.
Yeah, wow.
So you just go with the flow.
Go with the flow.
Yeah.
All right,
But
so
photography-wise, I mean, if I had to give the best tip for newcomers that are trying to photograph wildflowers, I do a lot of what I call field Photoshop.
what is that?
Picking things out of the photo that you don't want to be in there. Straight lines going across the photo is just blows it away, you know. So if there's a pine needle laying back there or a stick that's a straight line going across somewhere in the background.
Like a horizontal line you're talking about.
Yeah, or even at an angle or whatever.
Right,
whatever.
You want the lines
if
going.
you've got this flower and then there's a stick going across it, just like, oh man, you know. Spider webs, I know a lot of people like to photograph flowers that have spider webs on it, you know, just for the art part of it.
Right, but not for a
but
guide.
not for a wildflower guide. So you need to watch for spider webs.
So you just brush them off if you find the perfect
brush them
flower.
off. So that's why I call it field photoshopping. So I don't have to go to
I
Photoshop.
love that. That's a good name. Field Photoshop. Now, are there any like restrictions though from the environmental groups and things on what you can and can't do with these?
Sort of. I mean, you know, if you're in a national park, you can't like be stomping stuff down and picking stuff and all that, but you can move stuff around. That's not anything, you know.
Because I know Chris was telling me that when we were out in the Everglades, and he's like, oh gosh, you know, they used to have a lot more orchids, but people come out here and they take them so they can sell them. And he's like, that's against the law.
Yeah, and that's not so much, it's not going on so much now as it used to be back in the 20s and 30s and 40s especially.
Okay.
Orchid theft was quite rampant back then.
But now they have so many greenhouses, they know how to grow them, they don't need to do that.
Yeah, and the orchids that you buy are, you know, these big showy cattleyas, you know, the go to the prom type orchids.
Yeah.
There are some really pretty native orchids, don't get me wrong, but a lot of them have little minute, you know, 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch flowers that.
I tell you, my friend Chris, he could spot them too. He's like, look, there's an orchid.
Yeah.
I'm like, where?
Right.
We walk like 20 feet, and it's like a centimeter big.
I know.
I don't know how he sees them.
Yeah, so field photoshopping, that's one thing that will help improve photos. I use a light diffusing umbrella.
Okay.
This is just like it sounds. It's a camera. It's a photography umbrella that dilutes, especially white flower in full sun. This will take care of that, and it'll block. You can use it to block the wind.
Oh, I didn't even think about the wind too. Yeah, because this would give a nice soft light. You put this white.
So
see-through.
put
Well,
that right up
see-through,
under, and it blocks out all the, you know, takes away shadows and bright hot spots in your on flowers.
And how do you attach this umbrella?
I just lay it on the ground.
So you just kind of lay it over there,
or have to hold it if it's something up in a tree. You just have to get around to hold it the right.
Do you have a helper?
Position. Usually not, but
No?
sometimes I do. My charming young bride is sometimes with me.
Oh, come out in the swamp with me, honey.
Yeah. She likes it.
I like it too, so I can see that.
So that's one of the best.
But you can get one of these diffuser umbrellas pretty much anywhere.
Go to any good
store.
camera store and they'll have
or even
them.
the internet.
Yes.
B&H or Amazon.
And the other thing that I brought is this Wimberley plant, and this. You need to attach this onto the leg of a separate tripod.
Okay, so this is, you call this a plamp with a P.
P.
And that's because it's a clamp that does
It's a clamp for a plant.
Clamp for a plant.
Yeah, so I found out
so the clamp clamps onto a tripod, but not your tripod.
If you hook it on the tripod where the camera's on, the shutter will vibrate it just a little bit. And if you have a little bit of a long shutter speed, then it's going to shake it. So I carry this small, lightweight tripod. I clamp that onto it. This unscrews.
And this is okay, so the clamp goes on the tripod.
Yes, and then the stem of the plant, the wildflower, goes in here.
And this is just a little clip.
It's just a little clip, and you tighten it this way, and it's got a sponge in there so it doesn't damage the plant, the stem at all, so it doesn't hurt anything, and that holds it still in the wind. Or if you need a little bit of a different angle, you can bend it a little bit, and then you can bend this anywhere you want. So that's called a Wimberley plamp.
Wimberley plamp. And how much does something like this cost?
I don't remember. Probably, I think it's somewhere in the $50, $40 range, somewhere in there.
Wow, this is
great. But worth every penny. That thing has saved me a lot, because if you're out there by yourself and you need to,
and so this will hold this plant.
The wind's blowing between this and the umbrella. It's perfect.
How could you do that yourself? That'd be hard, even.
I will tell you a story. I was up in Okeechobee County, and there was an amaryllis with white flower growing on the side of the road. So I pulled off the road, and I stopped, and I got down. There's a white flower in the full sun. So I got my umbrella out, and I headed up, and I was crouched down. I was getting ready to take the picture, and I heard a car engine. and I looked behind me, and the Okeechobee County Sheriff was right behind my truck.
Ooh.
And he was looking at my license tag, and he was looking at me. So I got up and I walked over and I said, "Is there a problem, officer?" And he spit a big old wad of tobacco out, and he goes, "No, sir." He says, "We just don't see too many long-haired boys with parasols up in these parts." So I guess I did look kind of odd.
With your little umbrella.
With my umbrella.
Parasol.
Yeah, he even do the word parasol. He says, we don't see too many long-haired boys with parasols up in these parts.
Oh, shouldn't have hit my mic.
So,
oh my God,
that
that's
was kinda,
so funny.
So now I've been real kind of self-conscious about it.
All right, no, so if I'm a new, well, I am. This would be, if I decide I want to get into wildflower photography, I'm going to buy your book. In your book, is it going to tell me, like, what times of year?
Yes.
How do I know what time of year to go?
It'll tell you what time of year. A good thing to do would be to go to the Florida Plant Atlas online. It's just www.plant atlas or Florida Plant Atlas. It'll get you there. And now you need to know the botanical name or the common name of the plant with this. But if you know the botanical name, type it into the search window. It'll come up. There'll be photos of it, of the plant, so you know what you're looking for. There's also a link to herbarium specimens.
Oh.
So you click on the herbarium specimens, and each herbarium specimen, these are plants that were cut off and pressed, you know, for documentation purposes. So they're dried, pressed plants. In the label data, it tells you where that plant, it'll say, you know, 0.9 miles past the corner of this street and that street, you know, down here, and it'll give you exact. Now this might be 1979 when it was collected, but still, you know.
Yeah, if it grew there in '79,
and
it'll still grow.
It'll give you the date, and and if it was collected in flower, you know the date and you know exactly where it was.
Wow.
Unless it's something extremely rare, and then they won't tell you where it was.
Oh, they won't.
They redact that information, but that's one way to find out. Another thing is if you're going to a specific state park, let's say you're going to go to Myakka River State Park.
Okay.
You type in, go to Google, type in Myakka River State Park Management Plan. Every state park and every national park has a management plan.
Okay.
And scroll way down, usually towards the bottom of the management plan, there'll be a plant list for that park.
Wow.
It'll have every plant that's ever been seen in that park listed, common name and Latin name, and plant family.
Oh my gosh, I'm learning so much here.
So you'll know at least the possibility of finding that plant at that park.
But that won't have pictures. You've got pictures.
No, yes.
And nice pictures.
Well.
And now, but if I were to go to Myakka State Park, do you have a book for me or a guide?
Well, Myakka, see, Everglades wildflowers and Central Florida wildflowers, obviously there's not just a line and flowers don't cross.
Well, Myakka's in between, right?
So either
you gotta buy both books?
Either one of those books would work pretty good. I would probably tend to get Central Florida wildflowers, but there's there's about 300 species in each book, 350 or so. And there's about 100 species overlap.
Right, that makes sense.
You know, because of the
Just
nature
like
of the
what I was
beast. There's some things that are, you know, there's an orchid that grows from the Florida Keys all the way up into Canada. So, you know, they have a wide ranges, and they don't care about
they don't have
about dividing
line.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So,
okay.
So you know, the widespread plants will be in both books. But yeah, if you were going to go to Myakka, I would pull up Myakka River State Park Management Plan.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Print out the plant lists, and then you can look up those plants in either my book or go to the online atlas, the Florida Plant Atlas, and see photos of them there. So at least you know what it is you're looking for. But
we do a you know, I bought the minivan for the purpose of doing photo tours, and we do day tours from Naples, And Sarasota is one of them, and we do go to Mayaca. That's why I was kind of asking about Mayaca. That's part of our day tour. We go there, we go to Mayaca, then we go to the cemetery. Who would have thunk? Have you been to that cemetery, the National Cemetery in Sarasota?
No.
It's fascinating.
My favorite one is the one in Key West, but I like cemeteries.
I do too.
But the Key West one, you need to go to the Key West one.
I have been there, and I like it. But the one is, I mean, Sarasota is it's a military cemetery, so the graves are all the same, but it's heavily influenced by photography and art. So it's a really cool, and then of course we end up at Ringling because you have to see Ringling and Côte d'Azur, you know, the house and everything. So
in Key West, did you see the tombstone that says, "I told you I was sick"?
Yes, that is so funny. Gosh, Key West is a funny place.
Yeah, they're even funny after they're dead.
I know. All right, so what about editing? Now, we learned about your field Photoshop. What about Photoshop on the computer?
Here's something that a lot of people don't know. Without even owning Photoshop or Lightroom or anything else, just go to your computer. You know,
and this is a Windows computer.
Well, I think it's the same in a Windows computer. I have iMacs, but I think it's all the same.
Okay.
So you've downloaded a photo and you've got it on your desktop. Open up that photo, and then go up to the bar up top and click on Tools. And down in the drop-down list will be, what does it say? It says,
like to brighten and lighten, you can do
minor
I wrote
it down, right? So I wouldn't forget, and then I forgot. Yeah, it says adjust color.
Okay.
And so in there, in adjust color, you can adjust the contrast, the brightness, the sharpness. You can the tint, the saturation, I mean, all that stuff is just right there without even dealing with Photoshop or anything else. So it's real quick.
So some of the people who really like to take pictures but don't want to sit and edit them forever, they might really like that.
That's just a godsend. I
so
mean, most people don't even know about. Open up the picture.
But you don't know, is that an iPhoto or you're not sure? I don't know that much about Macs.
No, it's not iPhoto or nothing. It's just
opening up
opening up, and it's going to be up there. And because what that does, when you open up the picture, it opens up Preview. And in that bar up at the top, you'll see Tools, and then go down and it'll say Adjust Color, and you can do all kinds of stuff just right there without Photoshop, without any of that other stuff. But I use Lightroom CC, which is the Creative Cloud Lightroom. I think it's Lightroom 5. In there, that's what I use to download them off my camera into Lightroom. And then from there, I pick out the ones I want to play around with, and click on Develop, and then you can do all that kind of stuff. You know, you can do brightness and
do you do a lot of editing?
Not a lot.
What do you like? Because for me, I have a preset on Lightroom that I like to bump up the contrast a little on all my pictures.
Yeah, you can mess with the contrast, but also where it says white and black and shadows and highlights and all that helps a lot with making the photo look a lot more presentable, especially for publishing in a book. But then I'll always use Photoshop to get rid of little blemishes in leaves. You know, you're going to see spots or tears, or even on the flower you'll see some imperfections, you know, and I just go there and just get rid of all that and make the picture look,
so the flower is perfect.
Prettier, yeah. So the flower looks.
We want a perfect flower.
We want a perfect flower.
Wow. Now, when you do these great depth of field, is your background real sharp too, or because you're using the 105 millimeter?
Right, 105
you're
millimeter.
Blurring that background no matter what, unless it's a close background.
So there's usually a very soft background.
But the depth of field is on your.
It's on the flower.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it works really well.
So now, if I just so I'm an aspiring photographer to get into wildlife. So your best advice is to get the umbrella.
The umbrella, the Wimberley plant.
The diffuser umbrella, the Wimberley plant.
Right.
A corded shutter release,
yes.
a good tripod, right?
A good lightweight tripod, because I'm carrying, you know.
Yeah, you're carrying around.
Just the camera itself weighs quite a bit, so I'm carrying it around. I travel pretty light. Sometimes I bring a backpack, but usually I'm just carrying my tripod with. I'm pretty rough on my equipment, you know, but I just drag it around and.
I am too, and then it costs you more money. You
right,
know?
Exactly.
I know Joe Fitzpatrick, you know him, and he's
Yes.
like, don't carry your tripod with your camera attached to it over your shoulder. And then you see all these pictures of Joe doing that, you know? So are there any like top mistakes that you can think of or top tips that you would give besides like what are big mistakes that people make in this type of flower? Probably shallow depth of field, I bet, would
shallow
be the
depth of field.
the
That's
biggest
a killer.
mistake that
yeah.
they make, I
Unless,
bet.
you know, I mean, there's macro photographers that like just the stamens in clear focus
Yeah.
and everything else is fuzzed out, you know, for the artistic value of it, you know. But like I say, that's not my my forte. So I want a real clear picture of the flower. I've had a little bit of criticism of not showing leaves, you know, in the photo, and I try to do that as much as possible, but the title of the book itself is Wildflowers.
Right.
So I want to make sure people see the flowers. There's a description for each species that tells you what the leaf shape is and whether they're opposite or alternate and toothed or compound or whatever, you know, so all that's in the description, has the lengths and the widths and all that. So I understand where they're coming from, but I've seen other books. There's another Florida wildflower guide out. It's arranged by plant communities, and a lot of people like it, but I don't think it works very well because, first of all, most people don't know which plant community they're standing in. And also, there's plants like the butterfly orchid, the very common butterfly orchid. That's in practically every habitat there is in Florida. You know, you can find them in mangroves, you can find them in hardwood hammocks, deciduous forests, pine lands, you can find it everywhere, cypress swamps. So which habitat do you put it in your book? You know, it just doesn't seem to work. So, but the author of that book also takes pictures further back so you can see the whole plant and all. But half the time you can't see the flower clear enough.
Yeah.
And again, the title of the book is about wildflowers, so you need to see the flower.
Yeah.
So that would be my.
And they're beautiful pictures too. These are the kind of pictures you could enlarge and hang on your wall too. Have you ever thought about that? Trying to sell your
I've done a few. I mean, I bought a great big old giant printer that I never used and probably going to sell. And, it just adds too much more stuff. I do a lot of talking at conferences, keynote speaking and that kind of stuff. And I usually have a table there where I can sell, you know, I can buy my own books at wholesale cost and sell them retail. That's where you make more money. And so to have to sell photos and all that.
It's just too much more, too many things to do.
Way too much, you know, to have to haul around. I mean, it's hard enough with 6 books and a bunch of cards and all that, you know. And plus they want me to sign books, and it's just, you know.
So now is that like my next question is, what's next for Roger Hammer? So that's kind of what you're on the speaking circuit now.
Oh, I've been on the speaking circuit for a long time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's been going on for quite a bit.
And you like it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I went from talking to, you know, little garden clubs to being the keynote speaker at the World Orchid Conference.
Wow.
You know, so getting up and, you know, it's so funny that somebody did a survey and wanted to know what the biggest fear people had, and public speaking was number 1.
I know that. I remember that.
And now I don't. It doesn't bother me. I mean, I've walked up and talked to thousands of people at one time, and it doesn't seem to bother me at all. And I never have anything prepared. You know, I just go up there and figure it out when I get there.
That's awesome.
The cool thing that happened to me in my life, though, was in April of 2010, April 30th, 2010, which was my wife and my first wedding anniversary. I was at Florida International University receiving a honorary Doctor of Science degree, and I never and I never went to college, you know, and so
You never went to college, and you've got a doctorate.
And
wow.
so they told me, you know, here I had the gown on, the cap and all that, and they told me to go up there and tell the graduating class, there's probably 4,000 people in the audience, and they said, go, you know, give them some inspiration, you know. So I walked up there and looked at them, and I said, I used to dream about going to college when I fell asleep in high school. And look at me now.
Probably not what they wanted you to say.
Right, yeah, probably not. But I kind of used canoeing as a, you know, just trying to give them some sort of, you know, something to think about. Since I'm I like long distance canoeing, I kind of related it to life. You know, if you're in a canoe and you're paddling along, you're in the main river and there's a tributary, you know, and you take that tributary, if it suddenly feels like that tributary is not the way you really need to be going, you need to stop and come back and go back and try another tributary. And that's kind of the way life sort of dealt, you know, me with, you know, suddenly being in the Army as a tank gunner and then raising shrimp and then working in a in a nature center and then you know, writing books. It just kind of, it all sort of fell into place.
Interesting.
You know, but
well, that is true too, because we do get, and it's funny because that's another thing is it's easy to get distracted in those tributaries or whatever of life, you know. So staying focused on where you're going is a good idea too.
Well, you know, we were talking about too about cameras. Another bit of advice is for people to put more money into their lens than the camera body. The lens is what's going to make or break your photo, and so I see so many people do it just the opposite. They buy a really, really nice camera body, and then they go out and they cheap out on the lenses, and that's the exact opposite of what you really need to be doing.
And it's hard because, you know, we think, I need a good camera.
I know,
and
I know.
You know.
And so spend the money on the lens and cut down on the camera if you had to.
I agree, totally agree. So where can we find you? What's your website?
www.rogerlhammer.com.
Now, do you sell your books on your website as well?
No, I mean, if somebody wrote me and wanted me to send them one, I mean, I could do that, but all the books are there and some of my photography is there. One thing we didn't talk about too is the Exploring Everglades National Park book. That sort of forced me to buy a long lens and chase after roseate spoonbills and crocodiles and, you know, things like that that I've photographed. And there's a big, great big huge crocodile in 9 Mile Pond in Everglades National Park that I wanted to photograph. So I spooked it, and then I hid my canoe and got out and waded over to where, kind of near where it likes to lay. And I had to wait there like 45 minutes before it came back, and then kind of peeked up out of the bushes. I was real close to it, you know, and took a bunch of pictures before it realized I was there, and it bolted back into the water. But so stuff like that was a little bit different than wildflower photography.
Yes, oh my gosh.
And shooting, you know, roseate spoonbills from my canoe and that kind of stuff.
That'll have to be a different show. We'll have to talk about that, because that'd be interesting too. So so they can go to your website. Where do they buy the books if you don't sell them?
I mean, most anywhere.
Amazon.
I mean, Amazon has them all. You know, you might check Barnes & Noble. You know, bookstores seem to be disappearing.
And pretty much all
more.
these state parks and...
State parks have a lot of them. National parks, you know, like the main visitor center of Everglades National Park, and actually Shark Valley too, and maybe even the Gulf Coast Visitor Center. They probably have them as well.
That's so cool. So. We have a famous author here.
Yes.
I love it. So, well, thank you for being on the show.
It was my pleasure.
I appreciate it a lot. Now we have to have you back so we can talk more later. I'm going to talk just one more little commercial about the Florida Camera Club Council Convention. Woo, that's hard to say. The website is f3c.org. And that convention is a world-class, I wish I can't remember all the speakers, but I mean, Rick Salmon alone would be worth going to it. And of course me, Peggy Farren. But that's this coming weekend, or next weekend, March 10th through the 12th, and we're in 2017, in case you're watching this on YouTube years later. My workshop on Friday is called Using Flash Photography for Portrait, or Using Flash for Portrait Photography. So we're going to teach you, and then we're going to have a model shoot included too. So it's going to be really fun. All the links from today, everything we talked about, Roger's website, maybe we'll put links to your books in there too. Maybe somebody will buy your book, or
Yeah,
two,
well,
or three, or six.
Well, my the books are on the website, and my email address is in there too, so they
Okay.
can contact me if they need to.
Awesome. Next week on the Understand Photography Show, we are going to be broadcasting live from the FCCC conference, and my guest is going to be Rick Salmon. Now, everybody knows who Rick Salmon is. He's one of the most famous photographers in the world. He's a Canon Explorer of Light, and he's a super, super nice guy and a great speaker. So he'll be my guest next Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Understand Photography Show. If you want to watch it live, be sure to be here on our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/understandphotography, or you can watch it later on YouTube or listen as a podcast on iTunes. This is Peggy Farren. Thank you so much for watching the Understand Photography Show. Episode 26?
Yes.
Oh, I said 25 in the beginning, didn't I? We'll see you next week.
Get up!